Product market fit is really understanding the market first. The market is always going to win. Customers get to choose whether your product succeeds or not.
You see that a ton in software now, where people love to be able to get in and play with things and then give that feedback. And why would it be any different with a manufactured product?
If your customers are having problems, those are opportunities for you.
And they came back to me a couple weeks ago. They said, you know what? We had 5 of these things listed out. They really only care about these 2. And that is what is selling everybody.
Coming from the money guy.
Which is fitting. You were Green Day.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Next Gen Strategies podcast. My name's Grant Covault. Joining me, as always, is Tyler Davis. And we are really excited today because we have a special guest in Paul, and I'll let him introduce himself today. But we're really excited because Paul's going to be talking a lot about something that has been kind of a hot topic with some of the people who we have been, talking with, and whether it be in our professional groups or clients, et cetera. And we're going to be talking a lot about product and innovation today. So, Paul, with that, I'll let you kind of give the introduction and talk a little bit about, how you got to where you're at now, and let's go from there.
Sounds great. Well, Grant and Tyler, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you today. I'll start by just giving a quick background on myself.
Sure.
So I went to University of Cincinnati for industrial design and really enjoyed the hands-on program designing products. I co-opted at 2 medical device companies here in Cincinnati, big corporations, and had a great experience there. I learned that I didn't like the big corporate environment. And so I decided to move into consulting. And the reason for that is a lot of corporate, there's a smaller portfolio that there's a longevity with it. And so you stay with that product for a long time. And the pace is a little bit, slower. And so I really wanted to understand consulting, because I love diversity in the kind of projects I would work on. I wanted to, have a high pace of really kind of engaging my mind and the activities that I do. And so I consulted for 9 years up in Minneapolis, started as an industrial designer working alongside mechanical, electrical, and software engineers. And then that company started to develop their own products, and then they were acquired by a manufacturer. So I really got to see from concept through manufacturing on a global standpoint, all the steps, all the challenges that happen with delivering a product to market, and really enjoyed that. I decided to move back to Cincinnati. That company had some private equity, and it just was getting to be a bigger company, and I wanted to go back to a smaller company. So I moved back to Cincinnati and worked at another consulting firm that was really focused on research. And so they did a lot of voice of customer, concept testing, usability research. And I really got to understand what the needs of customers are before it gets to design and engineering to actually work on the product. And I really enjoyed that. I spent some time at Children's Hospital shadowing surgeons in the operating room.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Right.
It was a great experience, and really just look for unmet needs. Like, what are challenges that people in the operating room have that maybe they don't see because they're so focused on the steps, the procedure, and what they do.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that work. And then I started an innovation company with a high school friend, and we did that for 8 years. We worked with a lot of manufacturers, both medical device, but industrial B2B companies as well, just helping them understand the customers, the market, the opportunities, and really kind of create that pipeline of projects or products for the company. And then 2 years ago, I started Boulder, which is my own company. I'm a solopreneur, and I work with manufacturers on adding and strengthening product management. And product management is really about connecting the dots between the business needs, the customer and market needs, and the product, and really kind of making sure that you're developing the right products for the customers and that there's a unique value proposition with your offering. But it also has to tie into like growing the company, scaling the company, and really making sure that it's a good business decision for what you're developing. So that's a quick intro on me.
Yeah, and we appreciate that, Paul. And there's a lot of like I said, folks who don't always necessarily think through that whole business cycle. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we were so excited to have you on today, because you offer such like that kind of niche of really focusing on the innovation and the product and that voice of customer. And I can appreciate from a marketing standpoint that when you've got those things in place, and then of course tie on the financial side, what that looks like too.
Yeah. And I think we see it both ways, right? So when someone comes to market with something, sometimes it's hard to have both perspectives. So you may have the market fit nailed, but there's no margin in the work and you're not able to get it to profitability, or you have a product that's very profitable, but there's not a market fit. So it's very interesting to have somebody coming in kind of looking at that holistically to make it all work together with a little bit of research.
Yeah, for sure.
I think if you add really trying to figure out when you're doing that new product development or innovation, like how are we being really differentiated in the market, right? If we're highly differentiated, we can justify a higher price and a better gross profit margin, right? If we're kind of copying and more of a commodity product, then it's hard. We get squeezed financially as well. So those are things that, we want to understand that early in the process, not later in the process where it's almost like too late. So all those factors come into play.
Yeah, big time. And I think it's, you mentioned some of the different industries that you worked in, Paul. And I think that product market fit, like a lot of times folks might think immediately of like, well, I make a widget and I sell a widget, but it applies really universally, whether it's you're manufacturing something, you're a service-based industry, like you've got a product or a service that you're trying to, make sure is attractive to the right audience. And so I think that it's really, really important. And, really excited to kind of hear some of those principles and steps with, what we can do to be really good at that.
Yeah. So I think product market fit is really understanding the market first. The market is always going to win. Customers get to choose whether your product succeeds or not. And so you really have to know them. I'll share a couple of stories. I worked with an industrial automation company, and they had radars that they worked in different industrial plants. And one of the markets they wanted to grow in was wastewater and water. And so it's a pretty stable market, but they didn't really have a lot of experience with those customers. So I went on, they sent me to wastewater plants all over the country. So I got to kind of visit those and smell and experience those firsthand.
Yeah, what was that like what? I can only imagine what you would potentially see and smell like going to something like that. That's crazy. Well,
you can... not too many people tour wastewater plants, so you can call up the local wastewater plant and probably get a tour. But, so what I did was I would just walk around with them and understand how the plant operated and where the products are and what they had to do to maintain those. And, they walked the plant multiple times, right, to maintain the process flow and make sure there's no issues. And so one of the things that I picked up on is, it's hard to see some of these products. They're making these rounds all day, all night. And sometimes it's hard to know, like, is an instrument malfunctioning? And so one of the things that we came back with that company was, is there a way to put a light ring around the product so that, from a distance, you can kind of see, is it working or is it not working? And that was a great new product for them that really sold really, really well. And when you think about like, well, is that innovative? Yeah, it was, because it solved a problem for a customer. It wasn't like transformative, but it really helped solve that problem for the customer. So those are like simple steps that you could really start to do to understand that product market fit. I would really encourage you to go out, visit with customers, not to sell them anything, just learn like, how do you use our products? Like, what are you doing before and after? Like, what challenges do you have? What are the outcomes you're trying to do on your shift? And just kind of being immersed with that customer provides that context and insights that you could really come up with some great ideas. So I think it starts with those kind of steps. Further in the process, you can do like concept testing and validate different things. But really at the beginning, just really spend some time with your customers, understand their needs.
Yeah, So entrepreneurship is solving problems. Like the greatest businesses are solving problems in an efficient way, or solving a problem that's not been solved yet. And I think we've talked until we're blue in the face about, if it's a new business, yes, like you're going to go out and try to find problems to solve. But if you're an existing business, we keep talking about one way to produce more revenue for your business isn't to go acquire new customers. Sometimes it's to look at your existing customers. And I think Paul's hitting on another important point of, when you're looking at your current customers, you should be analyzing what problems that they're having with what you're already selling them, or if there's a new problem that they have, because it's going to be so much easier for you to generate revenue and have a better margin tapping into your existing customer base.
And I think that you nailed with, just such a simple thing of adding a light to something. Like, I know a lot of times, you might be looking at your product or service in a vacuum of, it's on my, if you're selling a software, like, I see my software on a computer, I know at some point in time it's getting delivered to customer. Or if I make a widget, like I see it out in the warehouse and I see it in the packaging, but until you start to really see what's happening with that product real time with somebody, and really learn, like what you said, Paul, how are these things operating? What's the environment that they're located in? And then light bulbs, literally, that was not pun intended, actually, that light bulbs might start going off. And then it's like, oh my gosh, like, why? Yeah, we can innovate and add a ring light onto it too. And then the customer loves you, and they they're not going to go buy that ring. They're at some point might go buy that ring light or that light somewhere else. And now you've kind of controlled that product market. So
what he's saying too here is that, I'm taking a leap here, but when you talk about innovation, you think like really big and crazy, but like it can be insanely simple.
Yeah, I do think that a lot of companies are afraid of customer problems, right? Our customers having a problem. It's a negative kind of, feedback that they feel, right? But I really want to encourage companies that if your customers are having problems, those are opportunities for you. So really kind of look at, pursue the problems that your customers are having. Don't look at it as a negative or obstacle that you're having. Tyler, you're right. A lot of companies think about innovation as like a new product for a new market that's never been seen before. And that's really hard. And I think what companies need to do is make sure that they have an incremental plan of innovation. And there may be some things that they want to pursue and really understand without a clear path for what that product or solution may be. And so really having some space within the organization to say like, hey, we know we need to make these improvements. Let's kind of do this. There are some things we need to just explore and be comfortable with exploring. So I totally agree with you on that point too.
I think that, kind of having that vulnerability with your customer is important to be like, hey, like we know we're not perfect. And we're always looking for like, how can we help you better? And we don't want to sell a stagnant product to you as your company evolves and changes. And so we want to be able to make sure we're doing that with you. And I think that, it's really, really important to have that consistent loop of feedback. And you're right. I've seen it too. And I've done it myself where like, I'm kind of scared to ask, like, what are they going to say back if I, ask them for certain feedback on certain things. But it can be, it can certainly be challenging.
I think one of the benefits of being a third party is that customers usually tell me things that they're not comfortable telling the manufacturer, right?
Yeah.
And I think, I think it's sometimes you need to get a third party to just go out and really talk to customers. It does a couple things. One is it communicates to your customers that their feedback is really important, so much so that you're hiring a third party to go out and talk to them, right? And then they also feel like, hey, we want to be inclusive in whatever new product you're coming out with. So there's multiple benefits and ways to kind of get feedback from customers versus just like doing surveys or things that are non-engagement and non-value added to that relationship.
I was about to say that. It's like, this sure as heck beats sending somebody an email survey that they don't answer, because why would they take the time to do that? You're showing up like that as a big difference maker. Let me just be here and observe. I'm not taking away from your time. I'm just here observing and finding problems with you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Paul, I know, there's some other things like just from the innovation process that you've, experienced and we kind of talked a little bit about, one example, but I know you have a little bit more to share just in terms of, what other processes and ways you're seeing this really go to market.
Yeah. So another example is I worked with a pneumatic valve company, and they made industrial valves, and they were so proud, and they made a great industrial valve that was longevity lasted 1 billion cycles, right? Wow. And so one of the things they wanted to do was go into adjacent markets, and their valves worked in life science. And so I went out and did research with life science customers to really understand what are their needs, what are they looking for in valves. And their feedback was, well, we need a lighter valve. We need something that has a smaller footprint. And we probably only need like 10 million cycles. We don't need 1 billion. and so I think if you look at, over engineering is good for certain markets and products, but sometimes the market wants something that's defeatured or fits their needs better. And so that's a real good example of really understanding an adjacent market and making sure that you really understand their unique needs to really adjust your portfolio to better meet their needs. So that's another example of, again, just doing customer interviews and talking with customers about their specific needs, because they're not going to tell you that they're not buying your product because of these reasons. They're just not going to buy it. And so the customer, my customer, had to really understand, well, how do we understand in depth why they're not buying our product? So that's another example of really understanding the customer as you move into adjacent markets.
So I want to ask you a question about that, because you touched on something there. Over engineering, or maybe another way to say that is you're trying to perfect a product in a way that may not necessarily be the right. You may not necessarily need to spend time on certain benefits or features because it wasn't necessarily what the customer was. So I know a lot of folks try to be perfectionist with, again, their service, their product, whatever. So how do you think, Paul, how do you see folks combating that, or what maybe tips and tricks do you see to where, if you come across a company or a person who maybe is struggling with, man, I want this thing to be absolutely perfect. What advice do you give, or how do you kind of work through that with a customer?
Yeah. So I think it has to do with building trust with the engineering team, right? And if they don't know what you're doing and why you're doing, and you're really looking out for their best interest, it kind of breaks down there. But over engineering a product that no one wants is not a good path for a company, right? And part of what I think the steps that I like to take is, when we have an idea, let's start to prototype and do some, quick concept testing with either sketches or storyboards or non-functional prototypes. Let's just see what customers think about our idea and how it solves their problem. And one of the benefits of doing like sketches or early prototypes, it feels unfinished. And so when you're talking with customers, it feels like they can provide some input to make it better. If you come out with a perfectly engineered product, it looks finished and ready to go to market. And so the feedback is maybe not as open as you want it to be to make sure that you're developing the right product. So I think it just has to go with building trust with the engineering team, and then also making sure let's just try some quick experiments with customers, see what they think and how we can do it. I'd hate to overinvest in something that ultimately nobody wants. So that's not a good scenario for teams.
That's interesting, because I was just about to ask if Paul, you were a fan of prototypes and betas, because I think people are afraid sometimes to do that because they don't want to send out a product that's half cooked, right? And then maybe get a bad reputation on that product. But right. I think what you're explaining is you're starting to work with your customer and say, hey, we've got this thing started. Help us get it across the finish line. What do you see is working and not working with this thing? And I think you see that a ton in software now, where betas have been, people love to be able to get in and play with things and then give that feedback. And why would it be any different with a manufactured product?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times the manufacturer thinks, well, we don't want our IP out of the office, right? We want to protect our IP. And there's a way to handle that. But I think, patenting something that doesn't sell is not worth anything, right? So I think we really want to provide that product market value and start to learn and test what we can do.
Yeah. And I think ones who do that really well, like ones who really engage their customers well, I think the retention of that customer long-term becomes a lot better. And so not only retention, but, if you are able to really, really solve deep down a problem for a customer, like I'm going to put my marketing hat on here for a second, that turns that customer into an evangelist for your brand. It gives you opportunity to, really have a solid case study or story to take to your next customer. And it really helps you kind of define your messaging. I'll give an example. I've had the opportunity to work with a software company here recently, and they're a startup company, but they've really, over the last 6 months, they're like, well, we haven't wanted to do a lot of marketing of what we're doing yet because we don't know what the functional features and benefits of we think we know what's really selling. And it's been hilarious because they've done a great job of some of the things you said, Paul, of really getting out on the floor with these folks and listening to feedback. And they originally had given me about 5 or 6 different, these are the benefits and the features of our product. And they came back to me a couple weeks ago. They said, you know what? We had 5 of these things listed out. They really only care about these 2. And that is what is selling everybody, because we thought it was going to be this. And it's actually only just these 2 things. And it's blowing people's minds. And so from a marketing standpoint, that gets me really excited to have these folks, because I'm like, yeah, well, let's reprioritize that. Let's focus on these 2 things. And so, it's crazy, what can happen when, as long as you really put that good research in up front, it's going to help everything else long-term as well and build that foundation.
Well, that client did a great job of focusing on the benefits. And what I see with a lot of manufacturers is they're really proud of the specs and the features of what they do. And, at some point, no one cares about the specs and features. They will eventually, but if they don't understand the benefit of the product and the outcome it's going to help them achieve, they're not going to get down to comparing specs with the competition, right? So really, I really like that story because they focus on the top 2 benefits. And as a marketer, you can really kind of leverage that in the market. So that's fantastic.
What I think about it too is that, coming from the money guy,
which is fitting because you were Green Day.
Yeah, I got to do that. But this is my podcast shirt. And in my brain, I think it doesn't matter what your business is, that you probably in some shape or form should be budgeting for R&D, research and development. We'll call it, whatever you want to call it. Because I think sometimes what happens is that, I'm a CPA, I do numbers, right? I understand things at such a deeper level. A chef cooks every single day. So a chef in his home might have $500 pots and pans, but not every American's going and buying $500 pots and pans. So you get really close to these things and you're so proud of the specs and the features, but investing some time and money into what your customers actually highly value, because you've gotten so close to this thing that what you value could be different is important, and in my head, and Paul, you might be able to explain more on this because you're probably going to advocate for it as well. If you're not doing R&D, you're exposing yourself to your competition because someone else is, and you may have this perfect product or perfect service that's great right now, but if you're not investing in what the next want or problem is, you could kind of get left behind really quickly.
Yeah, I think that's, you're talking about complacency, right?
Yeah.
Companies become complacent and they're kind of just, leveraging what they already have. The competition right now is pretty fierce, right? And we want to be the market leader, right? You want to be the one seen as coming up with new products and kind of pushing the edge and really kind of, challenging your team as to what they can develop, right? So I think you want to create a culture within the company too that is saying hey, we solve hard problems. That's why you're here. And you want engineers who are engaged with solving hard problems, not just, signing off on a drawing or something like that, right? So it really goes back to the kind of company you want to build and what kind of investments you need to make. But yeah, it doesn't have to be like, I know a lot of manufacturers have small R&D teams, right? And so the role of the product manager is to really help prioritize the roadmap and what they focus on so that it delivers a business value to the company. Because you can't work on everything and you can't work on nothing, right? So you got to really kind of focus on where are we going to spend our time to make the biggest impact for the company.
If you had any experience with these type of topics that we're talking about now, really challenging decision makers and owners, like their value set. And I'll give an example, because we're talking about how, you've created a product, you're really proud of it. A lot of times it comes down to quality or the materials and components are the best. And then you're going to go out into the market and find that, consumers may just want something that's more budget or cheaper. So I can imagine there are a lot of times where that's really hard for decision makers to pin that up against their values. Example is, when a business has, their high quality line and then they have like a lower quality line, and those lower quality lines can do really well, but I'm sure that's a challenge sometimes for their values for the business.
Yeah, I do think I was talking with a company this week and they learned of some product features that are malfunctioning, it's not working and customers are kind of colluging solutions onto that. And the CEO was like, that doesn't deliver the high quality standard that we have for a company. So we need to do something about it. Right. So I definitely think the brand and the values of the company have to be communicated with trust between those customers. Right. So it's that brand promise, right? So, what do we promise to our customers? We're going to deliver high quality, products that, help you solve your problems. And I think if you build that trust with companies or with customers, it really helps them out too. So I don't know if that kind of plays into what you were saying or if you're thinking something a little different.
Yeah, it's kind of both, right? The other thing too is I think determining what your business or company is. Are you the one that always delivers the utmost of quality no matter what? And that's the lane you're in. Because I think we had an episode that's going to come out, or this already came out, but in general, a lot of Americans are kind of addicted to cheap goods. So that could be, you probably have to decide okay, when we're saying we're delivering quality, in what perspective,
So I think another way to say it too is, and I'm going to butcher this because I just thought about it and I couldn't remember what it was. You can't win on quality, price, and I can't remember all three there are, but basically you can't win on everything. So you got to kind of pick where you got to kind of pick where you're going to be at, and I think that. The other thing that Ty is speaking to too is we've had the opportunity to work with a mix of businesses, both of us, and Paul, you probably have too, where, you've got an established business who's been around for 30, 40, 50, 100 years, and they've done things a similar fashion. And there's a little bit of a new generation coming into a lot of these businesses, whether it's the ownership and the leadership level, or it's your decision makers are a little bit of a different generation and different thinking, to where sometimes you have that kind of push-pull with, this is how we've done it. And it's always worked. And, is there really enough pain to change? And then you've got this other side of the coin that says it may not be a need today, but we've got to start doing this because we know where the market's going. And there's that risk that comes along with that. And Paul, you've probably seen that a little bit on your side too.
Yeah, I do think that, the way that I would approach that is rather than say we're making a big investment, which would scare the money guy, right? And what you want to say is, can we experiment with something? Can we try something, pursue it, maybe prototype something, and kind of see if this direction is really, resonating with customers? There's a lot with technology that goes on, and a lot of manufacturers are so used to delivering a tooled product, right? A physical product. But now you have to start to look at, well, how does technology potentially add value to that product? And that's a totally different mindset that they may not be comfortable having, nor would they typically have the type of team to make that happen as well. So there's a lot of, risk, but I think there's things to experiment and test and try to step forward rather than like a full leap to something new.
You know how you could get your finance guy to get on board? You could start talking about R&D tax credits.
Oh, geez.
So Grant's going to get mad at me for talking about taxes because that sometimes happens. But, R&D tax credits are, they're very specific, but just briefly to talk about it, if you're basically innovating a product or a process, there are opportunities to get tax credits against your net income of the business, or it's more expanded into your payroll tax liabilities. So I think it's super powerful for startups because cash flow is always challenging. Right. But your legacy business, well, if we do dabble into this, we're probably going to be able to do it if we qualify at somewhat of a discount because we might be able to grab these tax credits at the same time. So it can kind of make the financial decision maybe a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, absolutely.
I think in those conversations, a lot of, leaders ask, well, what's the ROI on experimenting? Mm-hmm. And I don't know, like, what's the ROI on having email? Can you define that? So I think there's a lot of different things that, we can't define a specific ROI number. Mm-hmm. And we have to be okay with that because long-term, it could really make a big impact. So I don't know, some things to think about.
Right. Well, we've touched a little bit on, Paul's shared some stories and what this might look like from, being able to have a light added to a product to, a lot of other things. And I think innovation, if you're getting anything out of this podcast, I think the biggest thing is like, there's no one way to innovate. There's no one way to manage a product or service that you're going about. And so I think it's just important to really kind of understand what your business is, who your market is, understand what the needs are. Don't come in with preconceived notions because it could end up leading to over-engineering, not a right spend. So yeah, I think these are all really, really important pieces. And Paul, I'm going to put you on the spot here and I want to ask you a question. So if you had, in your experience and the folks that you're working with, so if you have one piece of advice that you would say, as part of what I've worked with companies or whether it be product management to the innovation side to, if you got something on taxes, it's really going to blow my mind. What would be that advice you think, Paul, that you would give to these businesses?
I think if I'm talking to companies and it's all about clarity with their product strategy and it's about taking calculated small bets, right? We're not going to bet the farm, right? Because then the finance guy he'll be scared, right? Yeah. But I do think you can say like, hey, can we place a small bet? And what might that bet look like? And if that bet turns out positive, what does that mean to the business, right? And so I think not just randomly doing things, but having a clear strategy and a reason why with some ways to kind of measure the success is a really good step.
Well, I think that goes back to what I was saying before. All businesses should be budgeting for this. And if you get into that mindset that you're building your business's margins off of leaving this little sliver to take some of these bets, it's probably a really good idea for your business for longevity, sustainability, customer retention. Because like you said earlier, Paul, like you're starting to build your brand as the one that's out here really trying to solve problems for your customers and future customers.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you don't have a good GPM with your product, then you can't use that profit to invest back in R&D, right? And so if you have a really slim profit margin, it limits your ability to get that engine going and continually innovate and develop new products and solutions for customers. That's
where my brain goes when you ask what's the ROI on R&D. I think in my mind that I think there needs to be a percentage point or two built into your margins just to invest into it, and not really necessarily measuring the ROI on it, but just saying this is a part of what our core business is. We need to account for it into our KPIs and our profit margins and all that fun stuff.
And as a marketing guy, I would say, and this is you would appreciate, I love when a Paul and a you have their stuff figured out before I come in, because it makes my job so much easier. Because one of the things that'll happen is they'll say, well, I'm going to allocate X% to my marketing spend, and that's great. Let's go grow the business through our marketing and sales spend, when I could have potentially had half the marketing spend, but a better product service fit that actually would have been more profitable for the company long term, because you solved the problems of the customer in the first place, versus trying to hope that a giant promotional budget, was going to bring in a lot of customers.
Like let the product sell itself a little bit.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
A good product and a good service, I think, it'll sell itself, and then you just need to add in a little gas to the fire, which is what I try to do.
So if we're going to kind of get things close to wrapped up, I think another thing, Paul, it would be nice is just, okay, if someone was listening to this podcast and they've never even dipped their toe into, product strategy and just everything we're talking about, they're like, wow, I really need to think about this. What do you think, I guess, the next steps they should take are, and then maybe lead into if they're interested in contacting you, how they would do that as well.
Yeah. So I think, if you're interested in product strategy, there's a lot of resources that you can read about or listen to. I think I learned through talking with people. So if someone wants to have a conversation with me, I'd be more than happy to do that, just because sometimes it can clarify things much quicker.
Sure.
And people can get a hold of me at my website, boulderpm.com. It's BOLDRPM.com. And I have a newsletter that comes out every 2 weeks. You can sign up for that and listen and learn about different product strategy topics that I'm writing about.
Yeah. And follow you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn. You can. I'm not going to spell my last name, but I'll let you put it in the show notes.
We're going to have links and spellings and everything is going to be in the show notes for anybody listening today. So yeah, you got it. So, well, Paul, if we didn't say it at the beginning, well, thank you again. Great discussion today. Really happy to have you on the podcast. And, again, we'll link everything in the notes. And we hope that as again, whether you're a manufacturer, you're a service company, you're a startup, if you're just somebody who's looking to, find ways to tweak what you're doing through business and be better with innovation and product, we hope that you got some nice bullets out of this conversation. And if there's more to talk about from a product standpoint, obviously, Paul, you're in beautiful Cincinnati, Ohio, home of the disappointing sports teams. So really appreciate you coming on today, Paul, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Great conversation. I think the three of us thinking alike can really help a company. So I really like the conversation. Thanks so much.
Love it. Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye.
Thanks again for joining us today on the Next Gen Strategies podcast.
Be sure to follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you really enjoyed it, give us a share on any of your favorite social media channels.
And don't forget to leave us a review.